The Heavenly Demon. Can't Live a Normal Life. By Sanchin. Chapter 383. The Second Continental War. Part 6. The attack began with the mages. Behind Dimitri's swordsmen, who were quick to close distance with the enemy, they gathered their magic and crafted various spells. Fire cannon. Explosion. Whoosh. Flames burst into being. The blaze swept toward Ares in an instant, and Ares, having apparently expected this to happen, quickly moved out of range. Dimitri's training also included how to deal with mages. Ares tracked the flow of the magic, positioned himself at a spot where there was significantly less fire, and charged forward. He was fast. Just as Ares was about to eliminate the mages, a figure suddenly appeared through the flames. Whoosh. Wah. The sight defied common sense. The red-hot flames should have burned a human body to ashes, but there was Rodwell Dimitri, swinging his sword at Ares despite being engulfed in them. The fire fluttered, swirling around him like a storm. Second form, fire tornado. Clang. Ares blocked the strike just a hair's breadth away from his flesh, and Rodwell Dimitri followed up by unleashing a flurry. A fierce clash ensued. Ares had broken through the level 6 ceiling and was undoubtedly Dimitri's second-best swordsman after Roman Dimitri. At Rodwell Dimitri's current skill level, he had absolutely no hope of winning against him. However, due to the surrounding inferno, Ares was unable to give his full attention to his opponent. Whenever he found an opening, the flames swirled to cover it. When he attacked, Rodwell dodged into the fire and then reappeared from another direction, activating the divine fire sword technique. Third form, scorching flame. Clang. Whoosh. Things were going differently than expected. The Phoenix mages and Rodwell Dimitri seemed to be actively working together to press Ares. It was a promising strategy. After Rodwell unleashed a flaming flurry, Dimitri's other swordsmen stepped in to fill the gap, refusing to give Ares a chance to catch his breath. They were incredibly in tune, constantly shifting between offense and defense. The attacks Ares sent Rodwell Dimitri's way were blocked by Logan, and Fred swung down at Ares' head from above. This time Ares was quick to react. But the moment he blocked Fred's attack, Logan switched to offense, and when Ares tried to counterattack Logan, Fred blocked him this time. And then... explosion. Clang. Whoosh. As expected, another magical blaze rushed toward him. For Ares, this was nerve-wracking. Not even a level 6 swordsman could withstand a direct hit from such powerful fire magic, and the second he got himself out of range of the flames, Rodwell Dimitri once again appeared through the fire to launch another attack. Ares couldn't afford to be complacent for even a moment. Resisting the heat digging into his windpipe, he slashed through his opponent's aura in one swift motion. Flash. Rumble. Ugh. Two things happened simultaneously. Rodwell Dimitri was pushed back, and Ares' level 6 aura burst from his body. It was fortunate that Logan was there to help with defense. With that firepower, if Rodwell had let his guard down even a little, his head would likely have been blown off. In the meantime, Fred and the others were pressing into Ares' guard. Dimitri's swordsmen had indeed grown stronger. Even without Roman, they had the foundation needed to face down powerful opponents like Ares. But Rodwell couldn't bring himself to be all that optimistic about the scene unfolding before him. He's strong. Ares' reputation as the continent's greatest prodigy wasn't unearned. Even though he kept getting pushed back, his counterattacks were sharp, and he was returning their blows while taking hits that no ordinary swordsman would be able to withstand for even 30 seconds. If they hadn't predicted his betrayal, there would have been tremendous damage. As he watched Ares rampage through the middle of Dimitri, Rodwell couldn't be sure of their odds of winning this war against the Kronos Empire. They may even lose. But no matter how this war ended, he didn't want to mark Roman's absence with a defeat. Whoosh. Rodwell kicked off the ground. The battle was just beginning. Ares genuinely admired Rodwell Dimitri. Without key figures like Roman Dmitri, Chris, and Kevin, he never thought that Dmitri would be able to stand in his way with Rodwell Dmitri as their axis. Truly, Roman Dmitri's teachings defied all logic. Just a year or two ago, none of these people would have dared to look Ares in the eye. The fact that they could now face Kronos and Valhalla with such ragtag forces was all thanks to Roman's mentorship. Clang! He struck Logan down, quashing his aura, before whirling around to decapitate Fred. But before he could, flames jetted toward him. With Rodwell Dmitri's precise, targeted attacks putting him in a precarious spot, Ares had no choice but to go on the defensive again. In truth, Rodwell alone wasn't that powerful. However, the combination of his divine fire sword technique and the Phoenix Mage's fire magic was nothing to scoff at. Ares' skin was turning a blisteringly bright red. After exchanging just a few blows, he was slowly being worn down. This is dangerous. Dmitri was strong. The plan to subdue this place alone had been an arrogant one, and the moment his betrayal was discovered, Ares' role in this battle became limited. Now he sincerely acknowledged that even without Roman Dmitri, Dmitri couldn't be dismissed as some defenseless little province. They had built their own domain, and they were strong enough to stand on their own. Suddenly, he felt a pang of regret. To be honest, Ares had achieved remarkable growth under Roman Dmitri's tutelage, even more than he had with Alexander. By systematically developing in swordsmanship, he quickly soared over the sixth circle. At that moment, however brief it was, he had the thought that betraying Alexander and following Roman Dmitri instead might have been the better choice. At the pinnacle of swordsmanship was Roman Dmitri. For the first time since taking his place as the continent's greatest prodigy, he questioned his own identity, but that didn't mean he could betray Alexander. From the moment he accepted Alexander's power, Ares' fate was sealed. He had no choice anymore, he now had to dedicate his life to Alexander. Fate was cruel that way. Just as Ares was drawn to Roman Dmitri, Roman saw the sword demon in Ares. They both looked at each other and felt a strong attraction, but life didn't always go the way people wanted it to. Clash. GHK. Ares kicked Logan away. Then, taking a step back, he looked out at Dmitri's rapidly approaching swordsman and growled. I acknowledge you all. It will be impossible for me to take down Dmitri alone. It was time to carry out the original plan. The one that, if Captain Jonathan hadn't discovered his identity, he had intended to implement without warning. My life's purpose is not to devote myself to Dmitri. I, not Roman Dmitri, will follow in Alexander's footsteps and become Salamander's greatest swordsman. Therefore, I will show you all that it's impossible to win this war by relying on one man's power, even if that man is Roman Dmitri. He focused his aura, and then... slash. He cut through the chains holding the castle gate shut in one slice. Clunk. As their castle gate fell open and into the moat, Dmitri was left in dire straits. Damn it. Repair the castle gate. In preparation for any situation, Dmitri had protected the chains holding up their castle gate with magic and attached several extra chains to keep it shut. For anyone who didn't know Dmitri's plans, attacking the chains would have been impossible. But Ares was both an insider and strong enough to break the magic in one go, so he succeeded in cutting right through them. That was a problem. Even Dmitri's high castle walls meant nothing if the gate was wide open. Attack. Level Dmitri. Kronos' soldiers surged toward the opening in Dmitri's defenses. If they managed to get in now, there would be no way to stop their army from flooding the city. From there, Dmitri would be forced to fight in close combat. With their numerical inferiority, they couldn't afford to lose the advantage of their castle walls so early on. It was then, as Kronos' soldiers were charging in with bloodlust in their eyes, that a blaze surged down the castle walls. Boom. Whoosh. Eliminate Ares and repair the castle gate, now. It was Rodwell Dmitri. The inferno he summoned swept away the first group of soldiers in an instant, and he positioned himself in front of the castle gate to cut down their incoming opponents one by one. When he glanced up, however, he was met with an overwhelming sight. Every single place he looked was teeming with enemies. The realization left his mouth dry, but he couldn't back down even a single step. Dmitri cannot fall like this. Once, Rodwell Dmitri resented his brother. Because his older brother had burdened him with all the responsibilities of the eldest son, Rodwell had had to grow up fast to meet the expectations of the adults around him. But then he met his brother again on the battlefield. And as he stared at him, at the powerful aura he exuded, Rodwell had been overwhelmed by a strange feeling of comfort, not jealousy. I can let go of my burden now, he thought. Hiding in the shadow of my incredible older brother who refuses to back down against the Empire, I can finally live a slightly easier life. Wandering was a thing of the past for him. And Rodwell Dmitri, who had lost his way, found his place, and chosen the life of a swordsman, was the one Roman Dmitri had entrusted this duty to in his absence. He'd asked him to protect Dmitri while he was gone, to fulfill a role only he could as the second son of the Dmitri family and Roman's younger brother. Family believing in each other, getting to share Dmitri's burden with his brother rather than having to take it all on himself. The thought made him happy. Therefore, he couldn't let Kronos win like this. Roman had trusted him and entrusted this responsibility to him, and he didn't want to burden his older brother with news of defeat. Blood splattered everywhere as he cut down the soldiers in his path. Auras flared up in all directions, leaving him without a single moment to catch his breath, but Rodwell faced his opponents head-on regardless. He let the flames swallow him and his instincts take over. When he tilted his head, a sword whistled past his ear, and when he turned his body, a spear hit nothing but air. However, a sigh of relief was a luxury he couldn't afford at present. He immediately countered, decapitating his attacker, and as another head replaced the one he'd just detached, he lopped it off too with a spray of blood. One of his eyes throbbed. Even if he died in this war, Rodwell Dmitri refused to let it end in defeat. Fight to the end. If you hold on until the end, we are sure to win, he shouted to his soldiers, over and over and over again. Roman had asked for a fortnight. Dmitri still had far too much time ahead of him. Sitting in a dark room was Alexander, who seemed to be quite pleased as he watched the different screens in front of him. Hee, pathetic worms. Look at them struggling so desperately to survive. The first screen showed Umberto. Despite the fierce fight Calderon Drake put up, their frontline defenses had finally collapsed, and with the Kronos Empire advancing into their territory, the entire nation was in crisis mode. The reinforcements they had pinned their hopes on had no hope of stopping Kronos. If the three southern kingdoms had been that powerful, to begin with, they would have managed to stop the Kronos Empire with their existing alliance long before Roman Dmitri ever joined it. On the second screen was the lawless zone. Carmen had defeated the peacekeepers, crossed the lawless zone's border, and was now encroaching on the Frank kingdom's territory. As a result, the three southernmost kingdoms were in a state of emergency. With the Kronos Empire above them, the rebels of the lawless zone, and the Valhalla Empire threatening them on the sides, they had no idea how to respond. The three kingdoms couldn't hold on alone. They desperately needed help from other countries, but the problem was that those countries weren't in a position to help either. On the third and fourth screens were Cairo and Hector. All hell had broken loose in Cairo thanks to Kronos' attack, and Hector was in turmoil from Valhalla's. How exciting! This was fun. As the world devolved into chaos, Alexander chuckled before glancing at the last screen, Dmitri. With Ares' betrayal, the castle gate had been breached, and without Roman Dmitri, they were in dire straits. Of course, they were holding up better than expected. He had been sure they wouldn't discover Ares' betrayal at all, but they'd instead been quick on the uptake, and it didn't seem like Dmitri was going to fall in a day. But it was ultimately a pointless struggle. People usually fell into the following delusion, that the Kronos Empire had always dreamed of conquering the continent, but because of the existence of Salamander's other superpower, Valhalla, they lacked the power needed to make that dream come true. That was nothing but the wishful thinking of those who didn't know the truth. The fact of the matter was that stern Valhalla had been a pawn of Kronos. Valhalla had been under Kronos' thumb from the very start, and if Kronos had woken up one day and decided it wanted to conquer the continent, Valhalla would never have lifted a finger to stop it. However, they instead decided to wait for the right moment. Alexander's goal wasn't just continental conquest, but a grander dream that merely included it. Of course, he couldn't claim this was the right moment he'd anticipated, exactly. Thanks to Roman Dmitri, the timeline had been moved up, but Alexander was convinced that this war would become the cornerstone to realizing his biggest dream. Since all the conditions were being met at the right time, the Kronos Empire made the decision not to wait any longer and let their long-suppressed ambitions loose all at once. Roman Dmitri, this has been fun thanks to you, but this is the last time I'll let you run free. With this plan, he would cut off Roman Dmitri's arms and legs entirely. And then, after eliminating his armies, Alexander planned to hunt down Roman Dmitri himself. Of course, he did feel some regret. If only there had been more time. Through Ares, he would have been able to fully understand what Roman Dmitri was in his previous life and how true martial arts worked. Alexander had always felt a pull toward martial arts. If it were up to him, he might have considered keeping Roman Dmitri alive until he fully mastered it. He clicked his tongue. TCH, if only you had made your rampage a bit milder, you could have enjoyed your power for longer. The end was in sight. Starting with this war, he would finally execute the grand plan he had been crafting over the course of his long, immortal life. Just as he thought that, however. PSSS. The air in front of him warped, and from beyond the darkness, a shadow appeared and bowed his head. Lord Alexander, Roman Dmitri just passed Elter. In an instant, Alexander's expression turned hard as stone. Elter was a city in Valhalla. By all accounts, this was a seemingly ordinary report, but the issue was the location of Elter and the fact that only a day had passed. Damn you! Are you really going to make my life harder to the end? Elter was hundreds of kilometers away from the southern jungle, and according to Alexander's estimates, it should have taken at least 3 days for Roman Dmitri to reach. Chapter 384. The Second Continental War. Part 7. 1 day prior. As the continent of Salamander was engulfed in chaos, Valhalla's leadership received alarming news. Viscount Marin has been killed. We are currently forming a blockade to stop Roman Dmitri, but already thousands of soldiers have died. At this rate, it's only a matter of time before the blockade in the southern jungle is breached. No matter how many troops we deploy, we have no way to address the lack of mastery needed to handle him. It was absurd. Just a few hours earlier, Viscount Marin had been entrusted with full authority over an army and ordered to stop Roman Dmitri by any means necessary. Count Snowden, one of Valhalla's newest aristocrats, hadn't had much faith in Viscount Marin. He felt someone of his caliber couldn't stop Roman Dmitri alone. But since this was an operation involving hundreds of thousands, Snowden had believed they'd be able to hold out for at least a few days. In reality, however, it ended up being not even a few hours. Upon hearing news of Viscount Marin's death and their grim state of affairs from his deputy, Count Snowden flew into a panic. You useless fools! Our goal isn't to eliminate Roman Dmitri. Even if it means sacrificing all of our soldiers to do it, block his way somehow. The longer we keep him here in Valhalla, the more likely it is that Roman Dmitri's allies will be eliminated, and then even he won't be able to go against the tide. Understood. There was no other option. Trying to defeat Roman Dmitri in direct combat when even the strongest swordsman in Valhalla had kneeled to Ares was a bad idea. For now, a war of attrition was the best strategy. If they could wear down Roman Dmitri's stamina for long enough, even his monstrous strength would eventually hit its limit. It was a logical deduction. Well, no. Actually, even this went beyond the realm of logic. From the start, the idea of sacrificing hundreds of thousands of troops to trap one single man was completely nonsensical. But as time passed, the bad news continued to compound, and their fear continued to mount. The second blockade has been breached. We can't stop Roman Dmitri. He's moving too fast to keep up with, and even if we manage to form a line, he's slaughtering us and fleeing. He's moving faster than we can form the blockade. Arg! Through the communicator, screams rang out. Voices soon confirmed, in bloody gurgles, that even the third blockade had been broken. What a monster! Roman Dmitri was alone. Dmitri's personal soldiers had deliberately cleared a path, yes, and he was crossing Valhalla's large territory by himself. But regardless, he was abnormally fast. He was moving at a speed that would be considered quick even without any obstacles in his way, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers were currently putting their lives on the line in a desperate attempt to slow his pace. Dizziness set in. It had only been a day. As Count Snowdon's mouth was drying up, another piece of news arrived. We were mistaken. Roman Dmitri is not fleeing. He is stopping to commit a massacre every time he encounters a blockade and makes no effort to hide where he's going next. It only feels like he's fleeing because he's too fast for us to catch him. The truth is he's never once run away from Valhalla's troops. Count Snowdon, at this rate, it's practically impossible for us to delay Roman Dmitri for a month. Around that time, Roman Dmitri passed Alter, and all doubt disappeared. If Roman Dmitri could get past Alter so quickly despite being hunted down, the fact was that he would reach Frank's borders in about a week. A week wasn't enough time. Even if Kronos and Valhalla had thrown everything they had behind their declaration of war, it would have been impossible for them to get everything done in a mere week. Therefore, Valhalla needed to make a decisive move here. Send all the troops currently gathered to attack the southern three kingdoms to Roman Dmitri. The southern three kingdoms are not important right now. Preventing Roman Dmitri's intervention is key in this war. Only by making it so he cannot interfere will we be able to break Dmitri and isolate him. Even as he spoke, his throat was dry as sand. Just a week. This war would be decided around the time Roman Dmitri entered Frank's borders. Hundreds of miles away, as the Kronos Empire's army charged toward Dmitri, Flora Lawrence, who was in charge of its left wall, raised her voice. Division 2, ready your magic. Division 1, release your magic. Flames burst forth as the Phoenix mages under Flora Lawrence's command unleashed a stream of mana. Inferno. Inferno. Boom. Beyond the wall, horrifying screams pierced the air. Kronos soldiers dropped to the ground, skin melting off as they were engulfed in flames. Others clutched at their necks as their windpipes were burned by the intense heat. Hundreds of enemies were wiped out in one strike, but there was no time for celebration as others soon rushed in to take their place, trampling over the corpses of their fallen comrades. They approached the wall with the grim expressions of people running straight toward their deaths and began to climb up the ladders one by one. Pour the oil. Division 3, ready your magic. Archers, aim and shoot at the enemies climbing the ladders, not the ones in the distance. It was chaos. A little while ago, the castle gate had opened. Flora Lawrence was aware of that, but refused to panic and instead held her position. Ares was a major threat. He was an unpredictable, deadly setback that was impossible to prevent even if anticipated. Perhaps, because of the chaos he'd wrought, Dmitri might fall. However, it wouldn't be helpful to focus on the problem. Military strategy didn't always require ingenious solutions. In a situation where retreat was impossible, it was important for the troops to remain calm and not let themselves get overwhelmed when things went wrong. Stick to the basics, that was the core of military strategy. So, since Rodwell Dmitri was busy trying to solve the gate problem, Flora Lawrence focused on her own role. Division 1, prepare your magic. Division 2, release your magic. Spells lit up the air. Feeling her heart rate slow, Flora quickly made the call she needed to make to keep the left wall secure. Something had already gone wrong. To turn this situation around, what she needed to do was prevent any other complications from arising at the left wall, not try to fix everything herself with some grand strategy. That was the role of leaders like Flora. Serving as both a strategist and commander, she was firing arrows herself to prevent the enemy from climbing their walls, even as she doled out orders to her soldiers. Over the years, the seedlings in the greenhouse had grown into wildflowers. After going through things like the rebellion in Barco, Cairo's civil war, and the war with Kronos, she had grown into a completely different person as well. Thwack. One of her arrows skewered someone's head. Unfazed, Flora calmly aimed her bow at another enemy. The battle was intense. She was faithful to her role. However, she couldn't help the way her eyes frequently strayed toward Rodwell Dimitri. Please, hold on until the end. The scene at the gates was truly hell. At the sight of so much blood and fire, Flora Lawrence gritted her teeth. Stay focused. The war isn't over yet. Right now, her top priority was to fulfilling her duties. A short distance from Dimitri's walls, Mystic looked over the battlefield. These guys are really annoying. Has there ever been anyone who could hold their own against the Kronos Empire like this? He combed through his memories, but there was no doubt about it, he couldn't think of a single example. Those who rebelled against Alexander disappeared into the bowels of history, and the Kronos Empire had never faced a real threat. But things were different now. Dimitri, which had grown rapidly under Roman Dimitri's leadership, had previously managed to repel an attack from the Kronos Empire despite being from a weak nation. That day, Sven had died. Mystic had been quite bewildered to learn that a level 6 swordsman fell even without Roman Dimitri playing a hand in it. But the fun is over now. This war was already decided, Alexander had said so. When he first heard Alexander's declaration that they would conquer the continent, first heard the grand vision he intended to realize, Mystic had felt a chill run down his spine. Once a great mage who ruled the continent himself, it wasn't easy for him to swear loyalty to someone, but after seeing the future Alexander had planned, he could only bow his head in deference. There was an unstoppable destiny in motion in this world, and Mystic revered it. Whoosh! As he summoned his mana, the shadows rose behind Mystic. In the last war, Mystic used his teleport magic to attack Dimitri, and Dimitri retaliated by constructing magical defenses that would prevent further infiltration into Dimitri's inner sanctum. Even for Mystic, it would be impossible to penetrate these magical defenses and get inside. Using powers not permitted in the current world meant that a few people could be teleported under the premise that he wouldn't be able to use the ability again for a while. This was another unexpected development following Ares' betrayal. Dimitri wasn't the only one who'd made upgrades after the previous war. Dimitri. No matter how hard you struggle, you won't be able to hold out until Roman Dimitri arrives. Boom. A surge of magic tore space itself apart, and shadows were sucked into the purple dimension beyond the gash one by one. Just as he had accepted his destiny, Dimitri's destruction in this war was inevitable. Rip. Space itself opened up, and as the sky above warped, hundreds of shadows fell like rain toward the city of Dimitri. Kill everything you see. Keek keek. Their goal? Pure massacre. Only a few of them were able to get through the magical defenses and infiltrate the city, and they alone would be unable to annihilate Dimitri. Fernando, who was in charge of guarding Dimitri's inner fortress, and the rest of the troops not actively fighting on the front lines had proven in previous battles to be strong enough to stop the shadows. Therefore, Mystic positioned them to fall at the boundary between the outer and inner regiments. Since Fernando and his troops couldn't leave their positions, they planned to cause as much chaos as possible in the in-between. Ack. Arg. A bloodbath ensued. The inner barricade couldn't accommodate all of Dimitri's civilians, so some were hiding at the boundary between the outer and inner defenses or helping to transport supplies. These were the Shadow's targets. Mystic knew that no matter how many civilians they killed, it wouldn't turn the tide militarily. But unless Dimitri was full of heartless villains who didn't care about human life, this would inevitably be an issue for them. As expected, the situation was immediately reported to Captain Jonathan. Captain Jonathan. The shadows are attacking the city right now. Captain Jonathan slashed at a nearby Kronos soldier. He was not only in charge of defending the castle but also active on the battlefield, cutting down enemies attempting to climb the walls one by one. Damn it. Kronos finally got through our magical defenses. Kronos' strategy was a rare one. Usually, space-bending magic required a medium like warp gates to perform, But the Kronos Empire had shown a unique capability in the previous war. This battle was no different. Without any medium, they'd transported hundreds of thousands of troops to Dmitri. Captain Jonathan and the rest of Dmitri's soldiers hadn't been surprised since they had already seen it once before, but how such a thing was possible was still mind-boggling to them. During a meeting held by Dmitri's leadership after the last war, Flora Lawrence brought up an important issue. On the off chance that the Kronos Empire can get past our magical defenses and get troops inside our walls again, it would be a disaster. We need to prepare for the worst. To win the next war, we need to decide how we're going to react if certain situations arise. It was a brutal reality, but one they had to face. And that day, leadership had made a decision. Captain Jonathan stepped back and turned to the soldier who delivered the news. We can't afford to move any of our forces right now. If we divert some of our troops to handle the situation in the city, the gates might end up being breached, which would be the worst-case scenario. Leave the city to McBurney's task force. Do you think they can stop it on their own? The soldier trailed off. McBurney's task force was a special group. It wasn't that he underestimated them, but he felt that this problem was beyond what they alone could handle. People with backgrounds like McBurney. Those who had lost body parts or had abandoned their careers as soldiers thanks to the mental toll of the last war had chosen to follow McBurney down a new path. The task force protected the city in emergencies. They had received training similar to that of ordinary soldiers, but their opponents today were by no means ordinary. These were the shadows of the Kronos Empire. He couldn't help but grow worried. Clocking the reaction, Captain Jonathan spoke firmly. We are only doing what we can. Even if they are massacred, if we win this war, their deaths will not have been in vain. So, focus on our goal. The best thing we can do is fulfill our respective roles to the end. He looked away, no hesitation. Once, people questioned whether Captain Jonathan was satisfied with his position as commander of the front lines, but like everyone else, he had carved out his own place through the sands of time. He'd realized through past experiences that to become someone useful for Dmitri, he needed to think and look at things differently than before. It was then. Boom! An explosion rang out in the distance, a sign that McBurney's task force had begun their own battle. Captain Jonathan gritted his teeth and shouted in a loud voice that shook the chaotic battlefield. Kill them all. Show those who dare to defy Dmitri the price of that decision. Rumble. With that, Captain Jonathan unleashed his level 4 aura. He too had taken a step forward as a swordsman. Chapter 385. The Second Continental War. Part 8. PSSS. The shadows fanned out through the city, carried on the wind as they slipped through the streets in search of prey. And whenever they noticed a person hiding in an alleyway, their eyes flashed red. Chomp. Crunch. Guh, af. The creatures swarmed and ripped into their victims' flesh before they could even resist, tearing off their limbs and leaving the alley walls soaked in blood. They were like murderous ghouls. There was no thought behind their actions. Whenever they detected a living being, they would rush in and rip it apart mercilessly. For this operation, Mystic had chosen to mainly deploy the shadows closest in form to demons. They didn't target the people inside buildings in case of magic traps, but the people outside, like those carrying supplies, were killed without exception. Dmitri was plunged into chaos in an instant. Most fully armed troops were fighting for their lives on the outer walls, leaving powerless civilians to watch the bloodbath unfold in horror, forcibly covering their mouths to prevent any sound from escaping. Then it happened. A hitch of breath. A shadow and a woman inside a nearby building locked eyes as she was trying to peek outside the window. The shadow's face immediately contorted into a demonic grin. KRRR. Kill all the humans you find, that was the order the shadows had been given. They tried to avoid touching the people inside as much as possible, as instructed, but they didn't have the higher faculties to leave a human alone once they spotted one. The shadow's body puffed up as it got ready to pounce. But just as it was about to swing its massive claws toward the window, the sunlight shining above it was suddenly blocked by a mysterious silhouette. The newcomer stabbed through the shadow's head with his sword and wrenched its neck around. The shadow met its end with a shriek that unfortunately gave away its killer's position. McBurney yanked his sword out of the shadow's head and turned to look at the shadows that had noticed him. "There doesn't seem to be a large number of enemies," he shouted to his team. "Their intention is probably to cause chaos in the city and split the attention of those defending the outer walls. From now on, our role is to protect the civilians. Kill all of the shadows you see, and contain all of the pests here so they don't affect our outer defenses." "Understood." The task force moved out. The way they did so was rather unique. Some walked with a limp, some, like McBurney, were missing an arm, and some walked a little more slowly than most, like they were in pain. That was this task force's distinguishing feature. It consisted of people who were once regarded as unable to even hold a weapon in the aftermath of war, taking up arms anyway with an unbreakable determination. To them, McBurney represented hope. He proved that even someone with one arm could be incredibly powerful, and as people visited him every day for help and advice, what would become the task force they were today formed around him. And behind them all had been Roman Dimitri. To this determined group, he had the ability to provide all manner of alternate solutions and training methods, just like when he shared the left-handed sword technique. "KRRR! GHK!" Screams echoed through the streets. A member of the task force with a limp kicked off the ground and slashed a shadow in the chest, and others rushed in to confront the enemy. The resistance the shadows put up was formidable. Their demonic forms swelled in size and bared razor-sharp teeth, and some even held swords and had auras. Swoosh! A sword swung down on one of the task force members. Like McBurney, the man had only one arm, and since he was already in an attacking stance, he had no way to defend himself. Clang! Counter! But one of his comrades blocked the blow in his place. They had trained to compensate for each other's physical shortcomings, and a soldier with a bad leg deflected the shadow's attack. The transition between offense and defense was incredibly smooth, so much so that it seemed the one-armed man had already known someone would step in and block the blow. Without missing a beat, he immediately activated his aura and slashed through the shadow's chest in one swing, causing the shadow to shiver and dissipate into smoke. This was Dimitri's domain. A place very familiar to the members of this task force. Using the terrain of the alleyways to their advantage, they made quick work of the shadows, and the expressions of the civilians witnessing the battle were full of hope. McBurney's performance, in particular, was outstanding. Dozens of shadows were scattered like dust by his lightning-quick attacks, and his skill was such that it was hard to even notice that he was missing an arm. However, it was still too early to claim victory. While trying to finish off a fallen shadow, McBurney suddenly sensed danger and whirled around to block it with his sword. Slam! He gasped for air as he was knocked back. Blood gushed up from inside his throat. "How dare you guys try to take us on all by yourselves? I'll show you just how foolish an idea that is by taking that head of yours off your shoulders." Rumble. With that, an aura surged out in all directions. There was no doubt about it. The creature in front of him was a level 6 swordsman, and the leader of the shadows. A breath was all it took. In the split second it took McBurney to inhale and exhale, the shadow closed the distance between them instantly. Swish! He just barely blocked it, somehow managing to keep his head from getting lopped off by raising his arm in time, but he was still thrown back by the strike. His opponent was a level 6 aura swordsman. Although Roman Dimitri had redefined the aura system, blocking a level 6 aura was impossible with McBurney's strength alone. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, in the breath it took for the shadow to rear up for another attack, McBurney tore through the magic scroll he had prepared. Haste. Strength. Flash. Blessing magic cloaked him in its glow. This alone wouldn't be able to bridge the gap between a level 6 aura and his own, but he couldn't retreat now that the shadow was right in front of him. It'd be impossible for me to defeat a level 6 swordsman with the skills of an ordinary task force member. So I need to buy as much time as possible. The only way for us to beat this one is by eliminating the other shadows first and then launching a simultaneous attack. The plan wasn't exactly encouraging. He was probably going to die. But despite knowing that, McBurney had to do what he had to do. The clash that followed was vicious. Spotting the powerful swing coming his way, McBurney desperately blocked it before aiming for a weak point with his peculiar form. It was a unique adaptation of the already unique left-handed sword technique. The attack, which deviated from the normal trajectory most swordsmen were familiar with, exploited the Shadow's weaknesses, but his opponent had a level 6 aura and an incredible reaction speed. Clang! The attack was blocked. Flash! Blood splattered across McBurney's face. Fortunately, he'd turned his head just in the nick of time, as the strike almost took it clean off. He struggled to catch his breath. Back at the Southern training grounds, he'd never imagined himself ever facing a level 6 swordsman in battle. Even if he was one of the trainers responsible for overseeing one of Dimitri's training grounds, he was just an ordinary guy of unexceptional origin. Even now, he didn't have confidence in his ability to do remarkable things like Chris or Kevin. But he would have to bear it. Since there was no one else around to handle the massacre happening in the city, McBurney swallowed back the blood rising up his throat and moved. Swoosh. He aimed for an opening. The Shadow twitched out of the way with a sneer. Cheeky bastard. A series of strikes were traded. The only reason McBurney was able to somewhat exchange blows with this monster was because his usual sparring partner was no ordinary person but instead Roman Dimitri. The man was strong enough to overwhelm even a level 6 aura user. His time spent training intensely against him had made McBurney who he was today, and the Shadow found that very annoying. This was Dimitri without Roman Dimitri. How dare these insignificant creatures? In the human world, reaching level 6 wasn't common, but the Kronos Empire had already managed to deploy a new level 6 swordsman that no one knew about after Sven died in the last operation. It showed just how wide the gap was between them and the rest of the world. They were fundamentally different, to the point that it was infuriating that Dimitri and their ilk would even think to interfere with Alexander's plans. The Shadow, driven by his rage at their insolence, pressed McBurney hard. Clash! Every time his body jolted, McBurney's vision wavered. It felt like his very life force was burning away with every blow. Swish! Huh! At that moment, his opponent dealt a shallow cut to his leg. As McBurney staggered backward, the Shadow grinned and seized the advantage. Go on, please, call for help, it cooed. Dimitri's people are all about to die, so no matter the situation on the outer walls, you have to ask them to help out here. After all, if you don't, I'm going to kill every single person in Dimitri. I will make this place hell and then infiltrate the inner walls to behead King Dimitri. It was over. This was a match that had been impossible for him to win from the start. He was not Chris, nor Kevin, nor the renowned Fernando, who was recognized across the continent for his skill. He was a mere sword instructor, and this was his limit. The idea that he could stop a level 6 aura swordsman with only one arm had been ridiculous from the start. His heart pounded. Am I going to die here? Probably. That was an unavoidable fact. But even so, he believed his task force would see their mission through. And just as he was thinking that, kaboom! A short distance away, a massive explosion rattled the streets. At the sound, McBurney recalled a conversation he had with the members of his team just an hour ago. The task force had just expressed their intention to help out on the front lines. However, Captain Jonathan reminded them of their role and asked them to instead deal with any potential issues that might come up. All they could hear beyond the outer walls was utter pandemonium. As McBurney listened to the sound of magical explosions, people screaming, and soldiers clashing, he addressed the team that had decided to follow him. On the day I first met you all, I thought you had all lost your minds. It was both funny and pathetic to watch you, people who had lost arms, lost legs, lost their vision, people who couldn't sleep because they had nightmares every night, begging to take up arms again for Dimitri. At the time, I didn't ask you for your reasons. I went through the same thing, so I accepted the position of captain of this task force in the hopes that you would find something to live for. In truth, at the time, McBurney had been displeased with his new team. This ragtag gathering of broken people didn't look like a great task force from the outside. But, still, he couldn't refuse. As someone who had fallen into despair after losing his right arm, his swordsmanship, he couldn't ignore the desperation in their gazes, the familiar look of people struggling to hold their heads above water. Thus, Dimitri's special task force was founded. They were assigned their own missions, but they trained with doubts about whether they would ever be able to fulfill their roles in actual combat. But today, Dimitri was in peril, and their strength might be needed. As that realization washed over him, the questions McBurney had been holding back tumbled out of his mouth. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you want to join this task force?" "Well, isn't it obvious?" The voice that spoke up was a familiar one. The man, who had been listening calmly to McBurney's speech, bowed his head, reminiscing about days long past. "Captain," he said, "we still can't forget what happened when we were taken prisoner. Trembling in fear in that dark place, not knowing when we might be tortured, watching our comrades who were dragged away screaming get thrown back into their cells barely breathing. We'd heard the news that the war was over, but the longer it took Dimitri to save us war prisoners, the more it felt like we'd go mad with resentment. In reality, it wasn't Dimitri's fault. Dimitri didn't even know there were prisoners of war to save at that point, and even if they did, withdrawing from the ceasefire negotiations to save us would have jeopardized everything." The man's name was Carroll. He'd been a war prisoner from the 3rd Unit, and after being freed, he'd been the one to gather more volunteers and persuade McBurney to form this task force. But Roman Dimitri saved us. It's really unbelievable, but he was determined to wage war against Kronos just to save a few prisoners. Why would we want to join the task force, Captain? Everyone around us always points out that we could live comfortable lives on the war compensation stipend alone in our newly assigned civilian roles. But that's the exact reason we can't just sit back and do nothing. Dimitri didn't abandon us to the end. I absolutely can't allow it to fall to the likes of evil like Kronos." His earnestness rippled out in a butterfly effect, moving the people around him. Everyone else felt the same way. Even if their bodies were impaired, they wanted to help Dimitri however they could. "Maybe we will die while fighting in this unit," said Carroll, passion growing with every word. "After barely escaping imprisonment, some might even say that dying like this would be a waste of the second chance at life we've been given. But if we die for Dimitri, and Dimitri is able to live on thanks to our sacrifice, I am sure Dimitri will take care of my family. My wife, my children. Dimitri will never abandon us. So even if I have to die in the process, Dimitri must stand strong." His eyes turned red, on the verge of tears. He was only human, of course, and death was a scary prospect. But Carroll had been through a lot and knew that there were more important things in life than living. The other members of their unit nodded. They all felt the same way, and the task force, like all of Dimitri's other units, were completely armed in spirit even if their bodies weren't in the best shape. People who would do anything for Dimitri, that was what McBurney's task force was. McBurney remained silent for a while. Then, "I've prepared something for a day like today. I requested formal approval from the higher-ups to implement it, but they denied my request. Only Captain Jonathan knows about this, and even he vehemently opposed the plan, but I emphasized that we need to be prepared for the worst-case scenario and barely got his approval." His words came slowly, cautiously. But with Dimitri on the brink, McBurney was ready to do anything. "From now on, what I'm about to say is our secret, and I can only hope this secret never sees the light of day." Blood sprayed. Carroll staggered back through the red mist, his eyes losing focus. "Am I going to die like this?" The past few years, he'd lived a truly rough life. He'd watched the Beck family rise up the kingdom's ranks as soldiers of Dimitri, and done his own part to contribute to their reputation by making his way through various battlefields, even if his own military career wasn't all that impressive. Then, during the First War with the Kronos Empire, he was taken prisoner and tortured every day. But right when he thought his life was over, Roman Dmitri appeared to save the war prisoners after refusing to dismiss a message he could have easily ignored. He was grateful. This world was one where irrationality prevailed. Class society divided otherwise identical people by rank, and aristocrats often treated commoners as nothing more than expendable. Therefore, Roman Dmitri, and the feelings he inspired in the people around him, were unique. Everyone around him dedicated themselves to him, but Roman in turn did not take their dedication for granted. Whether through financial compensation or in the way he treated them, he never took from them without repaying it tenfold. Carol was so grateful for that, so thankful that Roman Dmitri took care of his family that it moved him to the point of tears. He sincerely respected Roman. In fact, he was so proud to live in Dmitri's domain that he had decided to create this task force so he could do more for this place he called home. Croc. The shadow lunged. Behind him, Carol could hear civilians screaming. He could already see it in his mind's eye. The shadow would tear him apart, and then it wouldn't be satisfied until it killed everyone on the street too. Carol grinned. Dmitri isn't yours to claim. His only regret was this, that he wouldn't get to see his family again. But he knew that if Dmitri was destroyed, they wouldn't be safe either, so he had no regrets about the decision he was about to make. Crunch. Teeth clamped down on his torso. But as the shadow prepared to rip him apart, Carol grabbed onto it as tight as he could. "You're coming with me." At that moment, the magic bomb connected to his heart activated. Kaboom! Ba-boom! Ka-ka-kaboom! In an incredible explosion of light and sound, Carol and the surrounding shadows were all wiped off the face of the earth. Chapter 386. The Second Continental War. Part 9. Kaboom! Ba-boom! At the sound of an explosion nearby, McBurney's blood ran cold. That must mean that a member of the task force has died. 1 hour ago, he had given magic bombs to the members of his battalion. He'd hoped they wouldn't have to use these dangerous weapons, but if worst came to worst, he needed a trump card they could use against the enemy. That was what the magic bombs were for. Magic bombs connected to the heart were set to explode when the user died or activated the bomb themselves using their mana. In other words, that explosion was a death knell. Proof that a member of their task force had sacrificed their life to wipe out the shadows. Thursday thump. His heart pounded in his chest. McBurney was also wearing a magic bomb. And if at the end of this battle, he came to the conclusion that there was no other way, he would make the same decision as those who came before him. Wish. The shadow disappeared from sight. Clang. Gah. When he looked up, just a split second too late, a bolt of lightning was coming down right on his head. It felt like his boots were melting into the ground as his senses returned to him, and under the continuous onslaught, McBurney rushed to get out of range. But the shadow pressed the advantage without giving him a moment to breathe. With each step back, bolts hit him from all sides, and McBurney's face, flushed with blood, was the face of a man who had reached his limit. Clang. Bam. 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 Die, die, die. If there were demons in this world, this might be what they looked like, this shadow, flickering with dark energy, pursuing him doggedly, eyes full of murderous intent. McBurney felt woozy. He blocked the next attack instinctively without seeing it, and his gurgling stomach seemed liable to empty itself out the second he had even the slightest opportunity to catch his breath. The destructive power of the level 6 aura in front of him was overwhelming. But despite the way he was slowly, steadily fraying, McBurney gritted his teeth and threw himself into the tempest regardless. Rumble. Blood splattered on the ground. A slight brush of the shadow soared toward the flesh of his arm, and pain lanced through him. But this was a pain he had braced himself for. McBurney dove into an opening and thrust his sword at an unusual angle unique to the left-handed sword technique. His aura burst from his body. Determined to die if this attack didn't work, he forged headfirst into the storm. But the shadow smirked. All of that training, the blessing spells. It was all meaningless. Even Roman Dmitri's tutelage wasn't infallible, And it couldn't make up for all of the shortcomings McBurney, who had been just a commoner from the start, had, especially not to the point of bridging the gap between him and a level 6 swordsman in such a short amount of time. The shadow adjusted its sword. He had barely spotted McBurney's attack, but that was still enough for him to react and block it. Then, swish. McBurney spun his body. Instantly switching his grip on his hilt, he aimed for the heart just as his opponent began to counterattack. It was a strategy of mutually assured destruction. Well aware of how formidable his opponent was, he predicted its reaction and exploited the opening it left. McBurney's expression was one of hatred and grim determination. Knowing that if he couldn't deal with this one shadow, Dmitri would be in grave danger, he gritted his teeth and bore his neck to his opponent's attack. The timing was perfect. Or so he thought. However, all that followed that fleeting clash was excruciating pain and the earth and sky swapping places right under him. Flash. Arf. Blood sprayed from McBurney's chest as it was torn open, sending him rolling through the dirt like a piece of trash thrown to the ground by a careless hand. The surprise attack had indeed been a threat to the shadow, which instinctively sensed that it was in danger. But although the shadow had legitimately feared for its life for a moment, McBurney's limits couldn't overcome the difference between the two. "You arrogant bastard. You really thought you could take me down?" It was a slight difference in timing. Infinitesimally small. But in that split second when his skills fell flat and he failed to strike true, the shadow let its attack loose and slit McBurney's chest. Step. He stalked toward McBurney. It was time to end this. McBurney staggered to his feet. It took him a few tries to drag his blood-soaked form up off the ground, but all the while, he never once took his hazy eyes off the shadow. His heart was pounding wildly. If he couldn't win this with his sword, he planned to use his last breath to activate the magic bomb in his chest and take this thing down with him. Die. He clutched at his heart, but just as he was waiting for the exact right moment. Boom. The shadow was blown back by another explosion. "Damn bastard," said a voice. "How dare you rampage through these streets?" Materializing from seemingly out of nowhere, Lucas dropped the invisibility spell cloaking his form, and launched a surprise attack on the shadow attacking McBurney. Boom. A cloud of dust swallowed the street. As he walked through it, he met the horror-filled eyes of the shadow. What is this? Its body had cracks in it. Lucas's aura wasn't strong, and even though it had clearly blocked the attack, the shadow felt like its insides were being torn apart. It couldn't understand what was happening. As it looked up at Lucas with shaky eyes, it noticed hundreds of people surrounding them, following Lucas's lead. They were members of Hellman. As he followed the shadow's gaze to the round weapons in each of their hands, Lucas grinned. "We weren't just sitting around all this time, you know. After figuring out that your power comes from the darkness, we've been persistently researching ways to chip away at that power. These holy bombs aren't strong enough to take your life, but they can still eat away quite a bit of your mana. The pain they went through in the last war had taught them a lot." Using Hellman's intelligence, Lucas designed the holy bomb through a collaboration between the Phoenix Magic Tower and Dimitri's priests. The surprise attack from a few moments ago was carried out by detonating a holy bomb. As Lucas had just freely admitted, holy bombs weren't the perfect weapons for dealing with shadows, but they still caused significant damage. Hellman, like McBurney's task force, was a group that had come into this battle prepared for the worst. Upon receiving reports of shadows appearing in the city, Lucas gathered members of Hellman and brought as many holy bombs as they could carry. The shadow's expression twisted viciously as it bore its ferocious teeth at Lucas. "Grrrgh, stubborn to the end, huh? But that won't make a difference." The shadow kicked off the ground, moving at speeds that were impossible to track. By the time he was once again visible to the naked eye, the heads of Hellman's informants were already flying off their bodies. They didn't even have time to detonate the holy bombs in their hands before they were dropping to the floor, dead. Lucas's surprise attack had done very little. The shadow was still wreaking havoc, and countless people had died in an instant, staining the surrounding streets with blood. But they'd been expecting that. When facing down an incredibly strong opponent, there was only one strategy available to the weak: human wave tactics. Roman Dmitri wasn't the type to get overwhelmed when facing numerous threats at once, but Lucas didn't think this shadow was cut from the same cloth. "Even if it means risking your lives, detonate those holy bombs," he commanded. "Die." Boom. Kaboom. Holy bombs exploded in all directions. The shadow's body was engulfed in divine energy, and when it made the mistake of slashing through some members of McBurney's task force, their magic bombs activated as well, meaning it took both physical and magical damage in turns. There was no doubt the shadows and their auras were overwhelming. They'd caused countless casualties despite their small numbers. But over time, their bodies began to fall apart under the onslaught. Many people died in the process. Hundreds, even. But as the mountain of corpses piled up to disturbing heights, they finally delivered a decisive blow. Boom. Kaboom. A holy bomb and a magic bomb exploded simultaneously. As the shadow shrieked from the violent impact, Lucas once again cloaked himself in invisibility and rushed forward to deliver a surprise attack. A fair fight? He didn't know the meaning of the phrase. After how hard his subordinates had pushed themselves to create the perfect opening, he threw himself into the thrashing aura in front of him without hesitation. Slash. A single strike was all it took. The shadow's head twisted, then slid from its neck. Then, starting from its toes, the level 6 swordsman's body began to disintegrate entirely. This is impossible. It rasped. Lucas had finally managed to kill the leader of the shadows. This was a powerful creature capable of slaughtering hundreds single-handedly, but unlike Roman Dmitri, it was unable to claim victory over its opponents in the end. Lucas and the others watched as the shadow completely dispersed into smoke. The second it was gone, he sat down in the dirt before his shaky legs could give out. The damage they'd taken was so extensive that no one could bring themselves to cheer. But he'd succeeded. Chris, Kevin, Fernando. Even without their most skilled fighters, he'd killed a level 6 swordsman. Lucas struggled to his feet and checked on McBurney. "You need to heal before anything else," he cautioned him. "In this state, I wouldn't be surprised if you keeled over at any moment." "No, I can't do that." With a shake of his head, McBurney peeled himself up off the ground. Though exhaustion was carved into every line of his blood-stained face, he poured a quick healing potion on his wounds and tore the clothes off of nearby corpses to bandage them up. "We've only just dealt with one of the strongest shadows. Until we handle all the shadows that have infiltrated this city, there's no time to recover or take it easy. Lord Lucas, this war is not over yet." With that, McBurney gritted his teeth, swallowed back his pain, and took his first step forward. "I can only hope that this time too, the sacrifices of our comrades who died before us won't be in vain." Slam. Rumble. Ares scanned the group in front of him with growing apprehension as he was once again pushed back. "This isn't good." Logan, Fred, Dimitri's swordsman, and the mages they were allied with weren't an easy team to go up against. Even Ares, who had traveled to Valhalla and single-handedly defeated their top-ranked knight, Caesar, couldn't entirely repel the coordinated attacks coming at him from all sides. It was vexing. Under Roman Dimitri's tutelage, he had made tremendous progress. He thought that no one except Roman could stop him. He didn't expect to struggle this much in a fight that didn't even involve Chris and Kevin. But after cutting the chains holding up the gate, he found himself effectively gridlocked. Hamstrung and currently unable to fulfill his assigned role, Ares took stock of the situation. Rodwell Dimitri had blocked the entrance to the city's gate. He looked quite vulnerable in the sea of opponents coming at him in waves, but his fire powers were incredibly effective in battles against large groups. It was ridiculous. The Dimitri family was born of common stock, but even Roman Dimitri's brother showed no signs of backing down in the face of Kronos. Not only that, but a moment ago, he'd gotten a report from Mystic that he was sending the shadows into the city. But so far, all Ares could hear was the occasional explosion from inside the city walls. There was no indication that the shadows had any tangible effect on Dimitri's forces. He wiped the blood off his sword, pushed his hair back, and regarded the people in front of him. I didn't realize Dimitri would be able to hold out this long. It's truly impressive. Dimitri's swordsmen surrounded him. Dozens of them had already died from Ares's counterattacks, but they seemed unwilling to get out of his way even at the cost of their lives. Among those still stubbornly blocking his path were Fred and Logan. Despite being infamous across the continent for their skill, they didn't take offense to being relegated to part of a coordinated attack. For Dimitri, they were willing to abandon their pride. If it meant defeating Ares, they wouldn't hesitate to combine their strength with the strength of those around them. The end of this war is a foregone conclusion, though, Ares continued. From the moment Roman Dimitri refused to compromise even slightly, he forged a future where Dimitri would inevitably be destroyed by Kronos. No matter how hard you fight here, it won't change the ending of this story. But keep fighting to the last. Ra! Attack! A deafening battle cry cut Ares off. His eyes went wide. Those shouts weren't coming from inside the castle. They were coming from outside. No way. There, in the distance, was a group attacking Kronos' army from the rear. And fluttering above them were the flags of the Northeastern Alliance and the Lunic Kingdom. Before Roman Dimitri left for Valhalla, he made a secret order. Contact Lunic Kingdom and order them to be ready to come through the warp gate installed in the Endless Mountains at any time. The Kronos Empire is liable to attack at any moment. Even if war unexpectedly breaks out, Dimitri cannot fall. Only a few knew the contents of these orders. The bitter pain they'd suffered in the last war had made King Dimitri, Captain Jonathan, Fernando, and Lucas, thorough. And as if to prove that their preparations hadn't been excessive or unwarranted, their fears had ended up becoming reality. So, the second Kronos showed up with their armies, King Dimitri immediately contacted the Lunic Kingdom and requested their support. And now, King Dimitri turned to Fernando and said, "Fernando." Yes. Dimitri is now on the brink. This war will determine the fate of our home, and countless people are out there risking their lives to protect it as we speak. Yet powerful fighters like you, a man who once defeated a level 6 swordsman, and soldiers skilled enough to serve as Dimitri's royal guard, are here wasting their efforts guarding me and me alone. Does that sound right to you? Outside the door, he swore he could hear shrill screaming. In reality, the enemy hadn't yet infiltrated the castle, but memories had a habit of playing tricks on the mind. "King Dimitri," said Fernando. "Don't call this a waste of our efforts. Even if Dimitri wins the war, if something bad happens to you, our people will fall into despair. That's only a problem for after we win. My survival doesn't matter if Dimitri falls." But Fernando. King Dimitri was clad in full armor crafted by his own hand. But while it seemed heavy on his shoulders, his tone was firm and his eyes were sharp and unwavering as he met Fernando's gaze. "My sons are currently fighting for their lives on the battlefield. Just over 20 years ago, they couldn't even hold swords, but now they're the ones out there on the front lines shouting Dimitri's name at the top of their lungs instead of me. Do you think it's right for their father to hide away like a rat? You shouldn't think that way. It's simply that I know there are more important things than my life. I will share my fate with Dimitri. It doesn't matter if we win this war, if my sons and the people of Dimitri all die in the process, I have no intention of living on. That is my decision. If you truly consider me the king of Dimitri, then heed my orders." At that moment, news came in. The Lunic Kingdom has arrived. According to the message we just received, they intend to launch an immediate attack on Kronos' rear. Creak. The king stood up from his throne, casting a long, imposing shadow. When he spoke, his tone brooked no argument. "Open the castle gates," he ordered. "From now on, the king's royal guard will fight by my side to eliminate this ruthless evil." At those words, Fernando's resolve crumbled. He knew this was the type of order he was supposed to refuse outright. The word no was right there on the tip of his tongue, but Fernando bowed his head, feeling his chest burning with heat. "I shall obey your command, my king." He, too, could no longer bear to stand back and watch Dmitri go through hell. Chapter 387. The Second Continental War. Part 10. Past the outer walls, the newly arrived elves stepped forward to initiate the counterstrike, firing a simultaneous barrage of arrows at Kronos' army. Swoosh! The mass of arrows blotted out the sun. With them already busy attacking Dmitri Castle, things were too chaotic for the Kronos Empire to react to this new attack from the rear, leaving them unable to get into shield formation fast enough to block all of the incoming projectiles. Thunk thunk. Screams rang out in all directions. The elves' arrows pierced through solid armor in a blink, and soldiers skewered in the temple didn't even have the chance to scream before they were dropping to the ground. The barrage continued without end. Realizing that they would suffer heavy casualties if they didn't act fast, some in Kronos' army turned around to face the newcomers, and only then did knights from the Northeastern Alliance and the Luna Kingdom step forward. "All troops, advance! Attack! Rah!" It was truly a magnificent sight. As Dimitri's allies and Kronos' army rushed forward, a bloody battle ensued. Thrust. Arg. Die. The two armies crashed into each other like opposing waves. Whenever an Alliance soldier cut off an Empire soldier's head, the Alliance soldier's head was instantly severed in return. It was kill or be killed. In an instant, the battlefield was covered in corpses, and soldiers on both sides stomped through pools of blood as they ran at each other, unwilling and unable to retreat. The most outstanding soldiers present were undoubtedly the non-human warriors from Arcadia who had decided to lend their superhuman abilities to Dimitri's cause. Kirahak. Among them was the werewolves, their rough, grayish fur standing out against the backdrop of the battlefield. One at the front of the pack was biting through the neck of an Empire soldier, blocking their way, ripping him to bloody pieces. The second it finished its opponent off, it dove into the chaotic fray that was the Empire's army, a tornado of claws and teeth. And behind them, slam, boom. A mountain giant was stomping down on Kronos' soldiers with his massive foot. Having faced the cusp of extinction, the few survivors left had an axe to grind with the Empire that had driven them to the brink. With a single, powerful swing of his appropriately massive club, the giant wiped out dozens of Empire soldiers at once, leaving a shockingly gruesome scene in his wake. However, the non-human warriors were not invincible. As the knights in Kronos' ranks who were capable of using aura began to target them one by one, though, the swordsmen of Luna Kingdom did not stand idly by. Rumble. Splash. Follow me. Caden and Zyro were the aura users representing Luna in this battle. Swordsmen from the Northeastern Alliance also lent their strength, but Caden and Zyro were standouts as they tore through Kronos' soldiers on the front lines. After going through tough times during Arcadia's plight, they had made great strides both mentally and physically, and Roman Dimitri's teachings had brought them to new heights. Flash. Zyro's sword carved a vicious path through the battlefield. Every time he encountered a Kronos soldier, he cut them down immediately, his eyes gleaming with an intense fervor. This is our chance to repay Roman Dimitri for what he's done for the continent of Arcadia, for Luna Kingdom. Let us prove that we are people who understand true gratitude, even in the face of ruthless evil. Today, we will die for Dimitri. He fought with a single-minded ruthlessness. Roman Dimitri was the hero who had saved Arcadia and Luna from devastation. For the sake of their savior, those following Zyro put their lives on the line without hesitation. And at that moment, something strange happened inside Dmitri Castle. Screech. The gate to the castle's inner walls opened. The troops assigned to the castle proper, led by Fernando, emerged and took in the sight of the bloodthirsty shadows rampaging through their city. Clear the city, he ordered. We'll eliminate all threats to the people, and then head to the outer walls. Understood. With that, the battle began. The soldiers that made up Fernando's royal guard were handpicked from Dimitri's elite, and they moved fast to help McBurney's task force and Howman deal with the shadows. The shadows proved to be defenseless under the assault. With Lucas and McBurney's efforts having already resulted in the death of their leader, the introduction of fresh troops resulted in a one-sided massacre. Puff. PSSS. Fernando was utterly dominating the battlefield, and shadows dispersed like smoke in his wake. Once ridiculed as little more than Dimitri's 30th gatekeeper, he had grown into a completely different man since choosing to follow Roman Dimitri. After Henderson's tragic death and Kevin's grievous injury in the fight with Sven, Fernando pushed himself relentlessly to avoid reliving the pains of the past. As a result, he'd made considerable progress. Each time his level 5 sword flashed past them, the shadows were sliced to ribbons, utterly helpless. Grr. Croc. He slaughtered every shadow he encountered. But the person right behind Fernando as he made his grisly advance was the real surprise. It was Romero Dimitri. The king of Dimitri had also taken up arms. He couldn't use mana, but he swung a giant axe that matched his stature, using the artifact's abilities to finish the shadows off. Crash. Die. People often looked at kings in the same way they might look at a delicate flower in a greenhouse. They thought of them as men who could only give orders to others while being unfit for the battlefield themselves, as nobles who couldn't even swing a sword right. However, King Dimitri was fundamentally different. Having worked in iron mines and forges since his childhood, he was familiar with combat, and his bulging muscles spoke to Herculean strength. He may not have been able to use an aura either, but he had survived many battles. Like their king, the master blacksmiths of Dimitri's forges had also joined the fight, swinging their weapons in spite of the Shadow's retaliation. Naturally, many died. There was no such thing as a safe fight, but the blacksmiths, like so many others, refused to see Dimitri fall today. They were a truly magnificent sight, the king of Dimitri wearing a helmet instead of a crown and swinging a battle axe, and Fernando at his side guarding him. They swept through the city, making quick work of the remaining shadows, and headed toward the outer wall. It was at that point that Dimitri's soldiers, including the special task force, noticed them. What is this? The troops stationed inside the castle opened the gates and came out. King Dimitri himself is fighting. They were all stunned. This wasn't the plan. The royal guards who were supposed to be safely inside the castle walls guarding the king had instead joined the battle with King Dimitri at their helm, which was baffling. But soon, the confusion gave way to intense emotion. At the sight of their king risking his life alongside his people, one soldier couldn't help but shout, "King Dimitri has taken up arms for us. Protect King Dimitri. Fight for King Dimitri. We can win this war. For King Dimitri. For Dimitri." A zeal spread through the ranks as soldiers began to look up and stare. Then, with a renewed conviction that Dimitri would be the victor of this war, they turned to face down their incoming enemies with gusto. With the arrival of reinforcements and King Dimitri's bold decision, it was at this moment that the unfavorable tides of this war instantly turned. It was one unexpected development after the next. At first, Mystic had also been an active participant in the battle, too busy decimating Dimitri's soldiers with his magic to focus on the bigger picture. But as time went on, he began to notice that things were getting worse. "Damn you, Dimitri," he ground out. It was maddening. He thought their plan was perfect. With Roman Dimitri having left for Valhalla, deploying their secret weapon, Ares, should have made overthrowing Dimitri easy. But things weren't going as planned. Ares had been discovered before he could execute his part of the plan, and although he was a level 6 swordsman, Dimitri's swordsmen were pushing him hard and keeping him deadlocked. Moreover, the troops on the outer walls hadn't at all reacted to the shadows Mystic had sent to infiltrate the city. And when he sensed that they were dead, he was livid. Every single step of the plan was going wrong. Despite Mystic being prepared for anything due to previous defeats, the arrival of reinforcements and King Dimitri's aggressive charge had worsened things. At this rate, it was only a matter of time before they lost hundreds of thousands of Empire soldiers. Mystic wouldn't exactly be heartbroken by the loss of life, but the problem was how Alexander would react. "If I fail again, Lord Alexander will be furious." Back-to-back defeats was unacceptable. If that happened, Mystic would definitely be held accountable. And if they wanted to keep fighting, they needed to preserve at least some of their troops for future plans. He gritted his teeth. Dmitri, if you think this is the end, you're mistaken. This is only one battle. Though I will admit defeat and retreat for now, when I come back, I shall kill you all without fail. In the meantime, he had to take a step back and do damage control. Retreat, he shouted to his soldiers. Withdraw for now so we can reorganize the front lines. The sun was setting as the enemy began to beat a hasty retreat. Noticing the Empire's movements through the dim light, Captain Jonathan, with a vein bulging on his neck, shouted, "Kill them! Kill them all without exception." This war wasn't a matter of simply winning a single battle. Currently, the entire Kingdom Alliance was under attack, the three southern kingdoms, Hector, and Cairo, so they needed to get decisive results while they had momentum on their side. As such, Dmitri's soldiers took off in stubborn pursuit, pouring through the wide-open castle gates and chasing down the retreating army, stabbing them in their exposed backs as they fled. However, they could only go so far. Eventually, as the Empire's army receded from sight, Dmitri's soldiers let out a deafening cheer. Woo! We won! We defeated Kronos! In the end, they had overcome a major hurdle, and the joy of victory washed over them. The Kronos Empire had prepared thoroughly for this attack, but Dmitri had prepared as well, and had succeeded in winning even without Roman Dmitri. However, there was no time to bask in their triumph. King Dmitri immediately summoned the leaders of Dmitri's forces, and they all limped into the meeting room filthy and exhausted. The war is not over yet, the king of Dmitri said gravely. The Kronos Empire has fled with some troops intact, and it's highly likely that they are preparing a second assault. Tell me your thoughts on this situation. Should we repair our walls and prepare for the next attack, or should we pursue them immediately and chase them off? Despite the tough battle they'd just faced, King Dmitri calmly set to work on next steps. This was what it meant to lead a nation. Though one of the wounds he'd received during the battle was quite painful, he didn't show it and instead glanced between Dmitri's commanders, waiting for their input. At that moment, Flora Lawrence stepped forward. May I say something? Speak. Kronos Empire launched this attack using a mysterious teleportation ability. But I don't think that power is infinite. If they had the power to instantly move hundreds of thousands of troops at any time, they would have used that same teleportation spell when they were fleeing just now. Or they would have used it to bring in reinforcements when the tides turned against them. But they didn't. Even the shadows they sent to infiltrate Dmitri were few in number. This ability clearly has limits. It was only a hypothesis, but Flora Lawrence was confident in it. Making rash judgments on the battlefield was often a recipe for disaster, but sometimes, one had to be bold to achieve results. She had faith in her experience. And conclusions based on experience could never be considered rash. Tomorrow at dawn, we need to send troops out in pursuit, she declared. What the Kingdom Alliance needs right now is not just the hopeful news that we've won a battle. We need to repel the enemy completely and ensure that the other members of the Kingdom Alliance know that we can win this war. The others weighed her suggestion in silence. They were fighting a war without Roman Dmitri. But Dmitri was beginning to do what Roman would do even without him around to give them orders. King Dmitri spoke. I agree with Flora. We will not just survive this war, we will topple the Kronos Empire and restore peace to the continent. Order the soldiers to get their wounds treated and get as much rest as they can before dawn. As soon as the sun rises, we will eliminate all traces of Kronos from our land. And what Dmitri was doing was bearing its fangs. Flora Lawrence's hypothesis was correct. Kronos had set up base not too far from Dmitri. While he'd ordered a retreat to preserve their troops, Mystic's plan was to rally from the precarious situation they were in and launch another counterattack as soon as possible. I have to wait until my strength recovers, though. Once I can open a gate to the Devil Dome again, I'll have the power to wipe pathetic Dmitri off the map. Hang in there, Mystic. I can't disappoint Alexander any more than I already have. He was determined to see this war through. So, knowing there would be no second chances, Mystic ordered his soldiers to rest. At that moment, Ares broke off from the rest of the troops. Mystic had boasted that Dmitri wouldn't dare pursue the Kronos Empire, but Ares, who knew firsthand how Dmitri operated, thought differently. Even without Roman Dmitri, Dmitri was more than aggressive enough to hunt Kronos down. After what he'd seen of this war so far, he realized that as things stood, the safety of the main forces was not guaranteed. So he left the main forces. While Mystic was busy serving as a distraction, he planned to go after another target. Dmitri is probably drunk on their victory right now. If they send out troops in pursuit of Kronos, I'll take advantage of the opening and infiltrate Dmitri again. This time I will definitely succeed. I will show them what it means to defy the Kronos Empire by beheading King Dmitri. During the battle on the castle walls, Ares had had to dive off the walls to save his life. And he was pissed about it. He was aggravated that he hadn't performed as well as he anticipated, and that the Kronos Empire had had no choice but to retreat. Ares had already chosen Alexander. To prove that his choice had been the right one, he had to win this war. He hid in the backwoods near the walls, preserving his body heat and conserving his stamina. Then, finally, dawn broke. After confirming that Dmitri had indeed sent a squadron out to hunt down Kronos, Ares got moving, avoiding the soldiers passing through the area. However, right in front of Dmitri Castle, he encountered an unexpected face in the underbrush. One twisted in a ghastly, bloodthirsty glower. "I've finally found you." It was the demon of Dmitri, Kevin.